सेव किया था ना?
मैं सिर्फ इसलिए गया था क्योंकि उसने मुझे कॉल किया, that's it. But listen तो.
Save it for someone else.
जिंदगी में सेव करना जरूरी है, मगर जब बात पैसों की हो, सिर्फ सेविंग से काम नहीं चलेगा। इक्विटी म्यूचुअल फंड्स में इन्वेस्ट कीजिए और अपने सेविंग्स को आगे बढ़ने का मौका दीजिए।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
Before, during, and after every war, one thing happens, and that one thing is called diplomacy. So, if diplomacy fails, a war begins. Then, during a war, if diplomacy fails, war prolongs. After the war, what does diplomacy do? Either it brings about a sharing of the spoils among victors, as might have happened after the world wars, or it brings back some kind of a modus vivendi between combatants so that you can achieve some sort of a durable peace. Hopefully a permanent peace, but at least a durable peace. What is going on right now in the Middle East is very heavy diplomacy, and not just the Middle East. Look at the state of the world. Geopolitically, the world has not been at war like this than it's been for 50 years before this, right? Because at this point, Russians were involved in a war with Ukraine in which NATO is involved, which means two of the preeminent military powers in the world are involved there. And now in Israel, the Middle East, where again many global powers will get involved. Right now they are involved indirectly. If push comes to the shove, they will become involved again, not directly, just like Ukraine. So NATO is not fighting Russia directly, but indirectly. And in this case, you might see other powers like Iran further being proxies of Russia and China. So this is a very complicated situation. In this situation, why did I say that geopolitically diplomacy is broken out big time? That it's not just because Joe Biden landed in Israel to show solidarity with Netanyahu, but also at the same time counsel restraint, right? And I will explain to you from what I read and what I understand in about 10 points how this is proceeding and how the situation is. But exactly at the same time, Vladimir Putin has also made a rare foreign visit since the war began, and he's gone to China. He's in China to attend Xi Jinping's BRI initiative conference. So he's also shoring up his own alliances. So while Putin shores up his own alliances, China and Russia are also looking at their own support base. And their own support base, a lot of it is actually the global south, something that our government, in my view, and in fact it's my stated opinion, I've said this in National Interest also in a column, I'll share a link with you, that somewhat quite unnecessarily Modi government, Prime Minister Modi himself, they keep on talking about global south, global south, global south all the time, whereas global south right now seems much more aligned to the Chinese and the Russians. Anyway, it's always good to reach out to your adversaries, sort of likely allies or current allies, so at least to cause a little problem for adversary, but that's a story for another day, that's an argument for another day. What's happening right now is that Joe Biden has landed in Israel, Putin is in China. Joe Biden has come to Israel at a point when the narrative on Israel versus Hamas is shifted just a little bit. Because after the attacks which came the previous weekend, that is 7th of October, global sympathy was fully with Israel, because those were the pictures you were seeing. And nobody said that. Some people might have suggested that Israel deserved it, the Iranians, for example, some of the other powers in the Arab world, but generally the global sympathy was with Israel. Not every country might have condemned it. Most countries outside the Muslim world condemned it. Some countries in the Muslim world also condemned it. Egypt, for example, UAE also, but others may not have, but generally the sympathy was with Israel. Now that sympathy has begun to shift because the narrative has begun to shift, and narrative shifts because the ethnicity, the religion or the nationality of the bodies shift. So as I said in National Interest last week, this has become a war of dead baby pictures, yours versus mine. So until yesterday, these were Israeli babies, Jewish babies, now it's Palestinian babies in Gaza. So that is how the narrative is shifting. And now came this big bombing at the Al-Ahli hospital. This explosion looks very bad when you see it on screens. Obviously, it was a terrible thing. Hospital was very crowded. A lot of innocent people have died. I don't know if any Hamas people have died, but lots of innocent people have died. Lots of children have also died. There is no doubt about that. That, while arguments are going on as to who's done it, that has shifted the narrative. It's at that point that Biden has landed in Israel. Now, I will take a little detour from here, right? A little digression. Actually, it's not a digression. It is something that is germane to what we are saying today. What exactly happened at Al-Ahli hospital? So, initially when it happened, condemnations came and everybody said this was an Israeli airstrike that hit the hospital. Almost everybody critical of Israel immediately said Israelis have done it. In fact, a lot of the Western media also said the Israelis have done it. How the narrative changed in the Western media as more facts came out, you can see from this set of screenshots that some people posted on social media from the New York Times. Everything changes now. Newspapers are not printed once in a day. Newspapers change all the time because everything is on the web. So you see how initially everybody said Israeli strike. Then everybody said in a strike. Then some people said in a strike by Israel, Gazans allege, right? By this morning, the picture had become more fuzzy. Picture became more fuzzy because more and more evidence was coming out. First of all, very early morning Israel time. In fact, around time, people like late risers like me wake up, which is around 8 o'clock. I saw already that there was a tweet from the Israeli ambassador in Delhi, Israeli Prime Minister in Jerusalem, saying that Israelis had not done it. Until last night, when I went to sleep, say around 2 o'clock, I was watching CNN, BBC, also Al Jazeera, right? And they were all saying that Israelis are saying that IDF, Israeli Defense Forces, are investigating what happened. They were not denying it. At the same time, they were not owning up to it. By the morning, they were saying very clearly that they had not done it and they now had evidence. They had intelligence evidence and they also had pictorial evidence from satellite pictures, also from drones, that these were actually Palestinian Islamic Jihad or PIJ rockets which had been fired towards Israel, and it is well known those rockets are not very sophisticated, they are not guided, they are just rockets fired in a very large number because they are cheap, they are sort of homemade, sasta, bhayankar or tikau. I am just twisting the old marketing line of sasta sundar or tikau. So in this case, sasta, bhayankar or tikau. So these are not missiles or rockets known for their accuracy or even known for their lethality. They are relatively small. So Israelis then claimed that they had pictures that showed that a flurry of rockets have been fired towards Tel Aviv and some of them fell midway. Now it is well known that 30 to 40% of Hamas rockets actually fall within Gaza. Now Israelis claim that these fell in the area of the hospital. They've shown some pictures showing the trajectory of these rockets, and it's possible that these rockets had a lot of fuel that caught fire, or maybe there was something in the hospital that got fire. In any case, global defense experts, military experts now say that it's difficult for them to imagine that Israeli Air Force would drop a bomb of a size or a missile of a size that would cause this kind of a damage, and particularly if there had been a missile launched from Israel, satellites would have caught it. Nevertheless, this argument is going on. I have no firm facts to share with you on this. All I can tell you is two things. One, a lot of people were saying, and I found a lot of the people who are also skeptics on Israel, they were saying, let's watch what the Americans say. If the Americans are non-committal and Americans say, we don't know who's done it, we don't know who's done it, we don't know who's done it for a long time, that means the Israelis have done it. Because if the Israelis have done it, and Americans find out, they will never say, because Israel is such a stalwart ally, is a strategic partner, ally, everything. Israel is the favorite child of America. anywhere in the world. America will never let Israel down. So the impression was, even among those who don't like Israel or who are critical of Netanyahu, that if the Americans find out that Israelis have done it, they'll never talk about it. They'll keep on saying, we don't know, we are not sure. So if they go on like that for some time, it means the Israelis have done it. On the other hand, if the Americans say, no, we know that the Israelis haven't done it, that will have to be taken more seriously. Everybody will not believe it, but it will have to be taken more seriously. Now, once again, going with the same argument, that in these situations, everybody will believe what they want to believe. Those who don't like Israel, those who are critical of Israel or Zionism or Jews for that matter, they will say, no, Israelis have done it, no matter what the evidence and no matter what the other side claims or what even the Americans say. However, in this case, Joe Biden has now clearly stated on arrival, he condemned the attack and he expressed great sorrow at the tragedy and the loss it caused, but he said that his people, his intelligence and security teams were investigating what happened. So he was non-committal. By the time he arrived, it's a bit of flying from America to Israel. By the time he flew there, he came out and he spoke to the press. He clearly said that this is a terrible thing that happened, but looks like this has been done by the other team. And you know what that reference is to. What does he mean when he says the other team? So that is where the needle has moved. Now, over the past 3-4 years, particularly since trouble started on India-China borders, then war came in Ukraine. We've become familiar with many open source intelligence figures, many open source intelligence handles, websites, social media platforms. One of those that I take very seriously, one of those analysts is Nathan Ruser. Nathan Ruser is a researcher at the International Cyber Policy Centre, ICPC, of the Australian Security Policy Institute, ASPI, in Canberra, in Australia. Now, on his Twitter page, he's posted a bunch of tweets, an entire thread of tweets which will run on your screens as I speak. I have the printouts with me, but these tweets will run. Once again, this is what he's analyzing looking at these pictures. Now, it's quite possible that someone else will look at the same pictures, another analyst who comes from a different point of view and will arrive at completely the opposite conclusions. However, Nathan Ruser is somebody we've learned to take seriously on China because he's done a lot of work on China in the Uyghur areas, Xinjiang. He's done a lot of good work on India-China borders. The last time we leaned on his stuff, his analysis, his satellite pictures was when that little pushing and shoving kind of incident happened off Tawang on our line of actual control with the Chinese. His analysis of these pictures, and you will see these tweets running, and these tweets are enduring for a few moments as I speak, so you can read them. I will also share a link with you so you can go there. Now he says, his first tweet is, now that the day has broken and we are getting better evidence, I'm willing to share some preliminary thoughts on the Al-Ahli hospital explosion. The photos of the scene are, to me, not consistent with an airstrike and are not consistent with claims that 500 people were killed. Now, what does he do? He's showing you pictures. Which make it look like this is where this explosive fell. Where the explosive fell, you don't see a big crater, so it does not look like it was a big bomb, because a big bomb would have caused a much larger crater. There are pictures elsewhere in the same thread that show you other craters caused by Israeli bombs in Gaza. Those are much bigger craters. So if anything, it's a much smaller explosive. Then he says that while a few cars, about 3 cars, just where this explosive fell, have been destroyed, cars around them are mostly unaffected. So that doesn't point to a very large explosion. What the pictures show, on the other hand, and he says, I'm not a forensic expert, but still I'm reading these pictures. What the pictures show, on the other hand, he says, is that vast majority of the damage, and I quote him, the vast majority of the damage is from fire. Only 3 cars show any sign of kinetic or structural damage, and for 2 of them, the general structure remains intact despite clear damage. So once again, not indicative of a very large bomb or a very large missile. And further he goes on to say that within 10 meters of the impact site, there are cars which appear mostly undamaged. See this tweet, for example, with pictures. He says This footage shows that one, the crater is very small, and then the buildings even within 20 meters of the crater are reasonably intact. So once again, not indicative of a very large explosion. So his preliminary conclusion, in all, the damage we see is consistent with a small impact with a lot of fuel accelerant. So that would be consistent with the Israeli view that this was a rocket that went wrong. Rocket had fuel, a lot of fuel to travel to some part of Israel, but it fell and the fuel caught fire. Now I'm adding 2 and 2. You can draw your own conclusions. Nathan Ruser says, in all, the damage we see is consistent with a small impact with a lot of fuel accelerant that likely caused most of the fire damage and very little structural damage. And then he gives you, for comparison, a picture of rocket impacts from Ashkelon. And he says the only real difference is that this explosion appears to have involved more accelerant, which would track with reporting that this barrage was aimed at Tel Aviv. And once again he says that if you see the damage and cratering caused by these rocket/missile strikes by Hamas at Ashkelon, which is a border town in Israel, you will see the same lack of significant cratering, same structural damage, I'm quoting from Nathan, same lack of significant cratering, same structural damage/radius to parked cars, similar in just a lot of ways. And then he contrasts this with airstrikes in Gaza, and he says, again I quote from him, compare this to airstrikes in Gaza, which tend to leave a much larger crater and cause a lot more damage. And then he goes on to say they also almost always leave big deposits of concrete dust after striking a structure, though the construction of this particular hospital could be different. So once again, he's not giving you a conclusive finding, but he's looking at the pictures that are available initially and arriving at these conclusions. So if you see this, and now we see a lot of other stuff coming out, and then he goes on to also say that this death figure of 500 looks inconsistent with damage caused there. You can see his detailed analysis, which has been running on my screen, and obviously you can be skeptical about it. And lots of people are. So if you go to his page, and I am sharing a link with you with the description, if you go to his page, you will also find responses from a lot of people expressing skepticism of this and also countering this with other pictures. Nevertheless, whatever happens, the pictures that matter right now, what matters right now is not so much this analysis, these tweets, the claims of Netanyahu and his government, also the endorsement by Joe Biden that it looks like the other team did it, which means Hamas did it. What matters right now is the pictures that are coming out. The pictures that are coming out from Gaza are pictures of dead babies, dead people, women, people suffering, and these are all Palestinians and Gazans. And that's why the narrative has shifted. And while on his arrival in the morning, Joe Biden, he might have only said that this looks like this came from the other team. Later in the day, at his press conference, he clarified it or made it more explicit, and he said, and I quote, based on the information we have seen today, it appears it was a result of an errant rocket fired by a terrorist group in Gaza. Now, I see a detailed report on the Biden visit in the New York Times by David Sanger and Peter Baker, two dadas of the New York Times, who say that at least two top administration figures in Washington, they let Biden know that narrative was shifting, that there had been a rash of protests in so many European capitals, also in so many American campuses, and sympathy was now shifting from Israel to the Palestinian side. And this is going to get only worse if Netanyahu expands the combat or goes inside Gaza, or worst of all, if he occupies it. So first point, therefore, first analytical point here is that one, that narrative is now shifting, and one of the things, while Biden expresses solidarity with Netanyahu, also helps Israel by endorsing the argument that this damage was caused by something fired by PIJ, which lost its way, and not by Israel, and definitely not deliberately, even while he does it. So burden of his trip is going to be to dissuade Netanyahu from doing something really desperately violent in Gaza, least of all occupying Gaza. So he's going to dissuade him from doing so. Now, between Benjamin Netanyahu and Democrats in America, there's been not so much love lost. We know that the relationship between him and Obama was really fraught. With Biden, it's not been so bad, although the last time Biden came to Israel in 2022, at that point, Netanyahu was not in power. Also at this point, whatever their relationship and trust with Netanyahu, the fact is that Biden's arrival has been welcomed in a big way in Israel. See these hoardings. These hoardings in English have been put up in Israel, welcoming Biden, thanking him, because Biden's initial statements have been very supportive of Israel. In his initial statements, he said this was an act of sheer evil, people are being slaughtered, this is stomach turning, etc., etc. He said all that, and that speech of his has been broadcast on so many Israeli platforms, including by many YouTubers, set to Holocaust pictures. So he at this point is very popular in Israel, and probably or most likely that gives him a moral position from where he can counsel restraint, because that seems to be his objective right now. Israelis, on the other hand, and I again read from usually well-informed Western media, at least well-informed about what's happening in their own governments. Israelis seem to have indicated to Biden administration that they do not intend to occupy Gaza. At the same time, even so, if he wants to invade Gaza to clean out Hamas, then the American side is explaining to the Israelis that, look, this is going to be very difficult, because we tried doing this in Fallujah in 2004 in Iraq, and you remember how bloody that was and how long that took. That took 6 weeks, cost a lot of lives, lot of civilian lives also, and similarly Mosul in Iraq in 2017, house to house, street to street fighting, which caused a lot of casualties and damage. And it took all of 215 days, about 9 months. So you don't want to get caught up in something like this, that too particularly at a time when you've called back so many reservists who haven't seen so much combat, to take them into built up areas. Chances are that they will be trigger happy, they'll shoot at anything that moves. To expect them to make a distinction between a combatant and civilian is going to be very tough, and every civilian death will become a liability for Israel. Now, before Joe Biden, US Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin III and Secretary of State Antony Blinken have both been in Israel and the region. Antony Blinken, in fact, tried to create an opening on the Egyptian side from Gaza, so Gazans could escape from there into the Egyptian desert, where they could be put up maybe in camps, because Israelis are asking them to leave, get out of harm's way, as the Israelis put it. But Egyptians haven't obliged. They are not opening the gate at Rafah, which is the border crossing. In fact, if you've seen reports and videos of Blinken's meeting with Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, the Egyptian president and strongman, you can see that there is a lot of tension there. Now, it's a very interesting situation, because Sisi is a rare Arab leader who's condemning the attacks. And I quote from what he told Blinken from these conversations. He says, yes, it is true that what happened over the past 9 days was very difficult and too much, and we unequivocally condemn it. But then he goes on to say that what has happened, you must understand, is also a result of accumulated fury and hatred, and you have to do something about it. Which brings us back to Biden again. So the US now has two carrier task forces in the region. One has already got there, the other one is headed there. So soon enough there will be USS Gerald R. Ford and USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, both there with their aircraft, missiles, everything. Chances are that this is a deterrent for Iran and Hezbollah. That is, if Hezbollah starts firing missiles, US will have no compunction taking out Hezbollah missile batteries. Again, I read from American media, NYT and others, and I know that some of this is based on briefings at the highest level, that while US aircraft carriers and carrier task forces will need clearance or orders directly from the president, going up to the president, before they can take any combat action or offensive action in the Israel theater, it's understood that Biden has said that he will be willing to give that clearance. That is to deter Iran and Iran's proxies from complicating the war. At the same time, listen to Biden's words. Biden's words before he comes to Israel, and that is on the 60 Minutes program. Biden says, and I quote from a 60 Minutes interview, there needs to be a Palestinian Authority. There needs to be a path to a Palestinian state. Now, is that going to happen? Again, that is something that it's something that I argued in my column last week, because ultimately this will lead to some kind of a Palestinian solution, likely even a Palestinian state to which India is committed. India is consistently committed, and Modi government has also stated that. And why might that happen? Now it's part analysis, part opinion, because these Hamas attacks have once again reminded the Israeli leadership of a very inconvenient truth, which is that over the past 20 years, 25 years, and you would remember we had featured this issue in an entire episode of Cut The Clutter. I will again share a link with you, that past 20-25 years have shown, and now these Hamas attacks have once again confirmed the fact that neither is Israeli military invincible, nor is Israeli intelligence infallible. That leaves Israel into a permanent or a perpetual strategic and existential vulnerability. And at some point of time, Israel will be willing to negotiate its way out of it.